In Los Angeles, under the blinding lights of the Riley Sparks show, one man's ego was about to collide with another's legend. What began as a celebration of Hollywood bravado turned volatile when a young talk show host turned admiration into a live challenge. Tom Cruise wasn't your typical movie star. For nearly 4 decades, he'd been his own stuntman, trained by elite military pilots, skydiving through storms and hanging from aircraft thousands of feet in the air. All to prove that danger was just another co-star when Chuck Norris stepped from the shadows, calm and silent. Producers thought they'd booked a nostalgic cameo. Instead, they'd unleashed the quiet force that would expose the line between performance and mastery. Tom's charm became a weapon, but Chuck's stillness was armor. When the challenge came, one man moved with spectacle, the other with purpose, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. What began as late-night entertainment became a lesson in humility and mastery. The audience came for spectacle, but Los Angeles would never forget the night performance met purpose, and two icons discovered that the most dangerous stunts happen when the cameras are still rolling. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. A single spotlight pierced the darkness, illuminating the polished stage floor of the Riley Sparks show. The famous LA studio hummed with anticipation, the audience a breathing entity of collective excitement. Camera operators adjusted their equipment while floor managers whispered last-minute instructions. Every seat was filled. Every eye focused on the empty host chair that would soon welcome one of Hollywood's most enduring icons. In the control booth, executive producer Marissa Lane slipped her headset on, scanning a bank of monitors. Her sharp eyes caught everything. Audience reactions, camera angles, social media feeds already exploding with hashtags. Number Tom Cruise Night was trending nationwide. 2 minutes, people, she said into her mic, voice steady despite the butterflies. Tonight's show wasn't just another celebrity interview. AJ, I want tight shots when he talks about the helicopter sequence. Capture those eyes when he gets excited. AJ Ramirez nodded from his position behind camera 3, the primary close-up camera. He'd been filming celebrities for 15 years, but his palms still sweated slightly at the thought of capturing Tom Cruise. His camera was more than equipment tonight. It was a conduit between legend and audience, and he felt the weight of that responsibility. You think he'll do the laugh? Someone asked behind him. The Tom Cruise laugh is guaranteed, AJ replied, not taking his eye from the viewfinder. That's why I've got the wide angle ready. When he throws his head back, boom, that's internet gold. The house lights dimmed, and the audience's murmurs surged into applause as the studio band kicked into the show's theme. Riley Sparks bounded onto the stage. 29 years old and riding the wave of late-night success that had made him the youngest host in prime time. His designer suit couldn't quite hide the boyish enthusiasm as he spread his arms wide, soaking in the energy. Los Angeles, are you ready for this? Riley's voice boomed through the speakers. The crowd roared back their approval. Tonight's guest needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway, because come on, it's him. Behind Riley, the massive screen began playing clips. Tom Cruise scaling the Burj Khalifa, hanging from an airborne plane, piloting helicopters through impossible mountain passages. Each death-defying stunt drew gasps and applause. He doesn't just act in action movies, he lives them. The man who does the impossible night after night. The legend who refuses to let anyone else take the risks. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Cruise. The audience erupted as Tom jogged onto the stage. That million-dollar smile already in place. He moved with coiled energy like a man half his age, high-fiving front-row audience members before embracing Riley in a bear hug that lifted the young host slightly off his feet. Whoa, already with the stunts. Riley laughed, straightening his tie as they both sat. Thanks for coming, Tom. It's an honor to have you. The honor is mine, Riley. I love what you're doing with the show. Tom leaned forward, instantly, creating intimacy despite the cavernous studio. His eyes locked onto Riley with famous intensity. And what an audience. Hello, everyone. The crowd's response was electric. Camera 2 panned across faces, bright with admiration from teenagers to grandparents, all caught in the Cruise charisma field. AJ's camera 3 held tight on Tom's face, capturing that perfect combination of confidence and warmth that had sustained a 4-decade career. So, your new film, Threshold Breach, I've seen it, and all I can say is, how are you still alive? Riley shook his head in genuine amazement. That helicopter sequence under the bridge. That was actually you. Tom laughed. That signature full-throated laugh that seemed to come from his entire body. 100% me. Every time the studio executives, they get nervous. Insurance companies have heart attacks. But here's the thing. He leaned even closer. If I'm asking an audience to believe in this character, in this world we've created, I have to commit completely. No half measures. In the control booth, Marissa watched the engagement metric spike on her tablet. Perfect, she whispered. Stay on him, AJ. Riley held up a still photo from the film showing Tom dangling from a helicopter skid over a canyon. This is insane. Most actors would never. That's the difference, Tom interrupted, eyes sparkling. I'm not most actors. Anyone can stand in front of a green screen. But when you see real fear, real effort in someone's eyes, that's honest. That's cinema. For the next 20 minutes, Tom regaled them with behind-the-scenes stories. How he trained for 6 months to hold his breath underwater for 6 minutes. How he practiced helicopter stunts for a year before filming. How he insisted on real locations over CGI. Each story more death-dying than the last. Each punchline delivered with perfect timing. The audience was spellbound. Even Riley, media-savvy and usually composed, found himself genuinely amazed. I don't think people realize how much you put on the line. You're what? 30 years into your career and still doing things most stunt performers would consider risky. Age is just a number, Riley. Tom replied, his posture straightening almost imperceptibly. When you love what you do, when you respect your audience enough to give them authenticity, you find the energy. Riley nodded, glancing briefly at his notes before looking up with a mischievous smile. Speaking of legends who've been doing it for decades, we have a surprise for you in the audience tonight. In the control booth, Marissa tensed slightly. This segue wasn't in the rehearsed questions. She leaned toward her microphone. Riley, what are you doing? Stick to the, but Riley was already continuing. Before we go to break, I want to mention that coming up, we have someone else who knows a thing or two about action and stunts. Someone who was doing his own fights when most of Hollywood was using doubles. Tom's smile remained fixed, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of curiosity, perhaps caution. Chuck Norris will be joining us after the break for a legend summit that action fans won't want to miss. The audience exploded with cheers and applause. Camera 2 caught several people looking at each other in disbelief, mouth-thing. Chuck Norris with wide eyes. Chuck's here tonight? Tom asked, his voice casual, but his posture subtly more alert. That's fantastic. I'm a huge fan. 2 action legends on one stage. We'll be right back after these messages, Riley announced as the show's theme music swelled. The moment the commercial light flashed, Marissa was out of the booth and striding toward the stage. Riley, a word, her voice was calm, but her eyes communicated urgency. While they huddled in hushed conversation, AJ swung his camera toward the wings, catching a glimpse of a figure standing quietly in the shadows. Chuck Norris, dressed simply in dark jeans and a button-down shirt, watched the commotion without expression. Unlike the kinetic energy radiating from Tom, Chuck stood perfectly still, his presence paradoxically more noticeable for its stillness. AJ kept his camera trained on Chuck, capturing what no one else noticed. How Chuck observed everything. How his eyes lingered not on Tom's animated gestures, but on the subtle reactions of the crew, the genuine responses beneath the performance. In that unguarded moment before the lights came back on and the show resumed, AJ glimpsed what his camera would soon reveal to millions. 2 different kinds of power about to share a stage. One that projected strength through motion and one that emanated it through stillness. Welcome back to the Riley Sparks Show. Riley's voice carried a slightly higher pitch than before the commercial. In the control booth, Marissa noticed his eyes darting occasionally toward her, a subtle request for reassurance after their tense off-camera exchange. If you're just joining us, we're here with the legendary Tom Cruise, who's been sharing some incredible stories about performing his own stunts in the new film Threshold Breach. Tom, Before the break, I mentioned we have another special guest joining us, Chuck Norris. Tom interjected smoothly, reclaiming control of the conversation. A true pioneer. Exactly. Riley nodded. And it got me thinking about the evolution of action stars doing their own stunts. You're famous for it now. But Chuck was really one of the first to bring authentic martial arts to Hollywood, right? Tom nodded respectfully. Absolutely. Chuck's work speaks for itself. I mean, before CGI, before wire work became standard, before actors were hanging off planes, Riley continued, a hint of mischief returning to his voice. Chuck Norris was actually fighting on screen using real techniques he'd mastered. The audience murmured appreciatively. Camera 2 panned across faces, lighting up with nostalgia. Parents explaining to younger viewers who Chuck Norris was. Middle-aged fans miming roundhouse kicks to their neighbors. He was ahead of his time. Tom agreed, his smile unwavering, though his fingers tapped a subtle rhythm against his knee. Many of us followed the path he helped establish. AJ captured this detail through his viewfinder, the first hairline crack in Tom's polished veneer, not visible to the casual observer, but magnified through the lens. In the control booth, Marissa saw it, too. Her finger hovering nervously over the button that would signal a quick cut to another camera. Chuck did all his stunts before it was cool, right? Before it was a major marketing point for films. Riley glanced toward the audience with a grin. I mean, those roundhouse kicks were the real deal. They certainly were, Tom replied, his voice dropping to a slightly more serious register. But what I do is a bit different. The scale, the technical requirements. Oh, completely different eras for sure. Riley jumped in. But I've always wondered who's the real deal when it comes to action stars doing their own dangerous work. The subtle challenge hung in the air. In the shadows backstage, Chuck Norris watched the exchange with calm detachment, noting how the young host was steering the conversation toward conflict rather than celebration. His eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with assessment. Tom let out another laugh, though. Keen observers might notice it didn't quite reach his eyes this time. That's an impossible comparison, Riley. Different styles, different generations. I have nothing but respect for Chuck's pioneering work. But if we're talking authentic action, real risk, the audience wants to know. Riley turned to the crowd. Am I right? Who would you rather see in a real action sequence, Tom Cruise or Chuck Norris? The audience erupted into competing chants. Tom. Tom battled against Chuck. Chuck. The energy in the studio transformed from admiration to something more primal. The thrill of potential confrontation. In the control booth, Marissa pressed her headset closer to her ear. Camera 4. Get ready for Chuck's entrance. Riley, wrap this up and introduce him properly. Her voice carried a warning undertone. This isn't Fight Club. But Riley was feeding off the crowd's energy. Tom, you've jumped off buildings, hung from cliffs, flown helicopters through canyons. What do you think? Could you handle yourself in a situation that wasn't choreographed if the cameras weren't rolling? Tom's posture shifted subtly, straightening, shoulders squaring, his famous smile remained, but something flashed behind his eyes. Pride, challenge, the instinct of a man who had built an identity around being perceived as fearless. Riley, everything I do has real risk, real consequences. The helicopters are real. The heights are real. The physical training is intense and authentic. Tom's voice carried absolute conviction. That's why people connect with these films. They know I'm not faking it. Ladies and gentlemen, Riley announced, sensing the perfect moment of tension. Please welcome a true legend of martial arts and action cinema, the one and only Chuck Norris. The crowd rose to their feet as Chuck walked onto the stage. No jogging, no high fives, just measured, deliberate steps. He moved with the quiet economy of someone who had nothing to prove. Dressed, simply compared to Tom's tailored perfection, the contrast was immediately apparent. One man projecting energy outward, the other containing it within. AJ swung his camera between both men, capturing the moment they shook hands. The difference in their grips was telling. Tom's enthusiastic and camera-ready. Chuck's firm but restrained. Chuck, welcome to the show, Riley beamed. An honor to have you both here. Thank you, Riley. Chuck replied, his voice softer than many might have expected, forcing everyone to listen more carefully. "Good to see you, Tom." He settled into the adjacent chair, posture relaxed, but perfectly balanced. "We were just discussing the evolution of stunt work in action films," Riley explained. Tom was sharing how he pushes himself to do these incredible stunts personally instead of using doubles. Chuck nodded. "I've seen your work. Impressive commitment. Coming from you. That means a lot," Tom replied with genuine respect. Though he continued almost immediately, "I was telling Riley how different the demands are now. The technological complexity, the scale of modern action sequences. Different, not necessarily more difficult," Chuck commented mildly. The subtle correction landing softly but unmistakably. An almost imperceptible pause followed, brief enough that casual viewers might miss it. But in the control booth, Marissa registered the shift. The conversation's center of gravity had moved. Riley seized the opening. "That's an interesting point, Chuck. How would you compare the physical demands of your era versus what actors like Tom face today?" "Every generation has its challenges," Chuck answered, his economy of words contrasting with Tom's expansiveness. "But the fundamentals remain the same. Discipline, preparation, humility." "Humility," Riley echoed, leaning forward. "That's not usually the first word associated with action heroes." "It should be," Chuck said simply. "The best martial artists I've known understand their limitations. That's how they surpass them." Tom nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. That's why I spend months or years preparing for certain sequences, knowing the risks, respecting them, and pushing boundaries." Riley added, "Tom, you're famous for constantly raising the bar, doing things people say can't be done safely because that's what the audience deserves." Tom replied, his passion evident. "They know when something's real and when it's fake. They feel the difference." Chuck's expression remained neutral, but something in his posture suggested attentiveness rather than agreement. Riley noticed the subtle disconnect and pressed further. "Chuck, do you think there's a line between bravery and recklessness when it comes to performers doing their own stunts?" "There is," Chuck replied. "The line exists in why you're doing it." The simplicity of the answer created another momentary silence, deeper this time. AJ kept his camera steady on Chuck's face, capturing the quiet authority that seemed to emanate from him without effort. "What do you mean by that?" Riley asked, genuinely curious. "Now, if you're doing it to prove something to others, that's one motivation," Chuck elaborated. "If you're doing it because it's necessary for the story, that's another." Tom shifted in his seat. "Well, I think we're all in this business to entertain, to give audiences something special. So, who would win in a real situation?" Riley interjected, unable to resist the obvious tension point. "Two legends, no script, no second takes. Who walks away?" The audience held their collective breath. In the control booth, Marissa put her hand over her microphone to stifle a groan. Tom laughed that famous laugh, though it sounded slightly different now. "Come on, Riley. That's not what this is about. We're both professionals with different specialties." "But hypothetically," Riley persisted, "you both do your own stunts. You both train intensively. The fans want it doubled." "No." Chuck sat motionless, neither encouraging nor shutting down the line of questioning. His silence itself became a presence in the conversation. Tom glanced at Chuck, then back to Riley. A flicker of competitive fire ignited behind his eyes, the same determination that had pushed him to dangle from the world's tallest building, to learn to fly helicopters for a film sequence, to maintain his status as Hollywood's most committed action star. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Look, in a choreographed sequence, we both deliver what the script requires." Tom answered carefully. "But if you're asking about real-world capability," he paused, seeming to wrestle between diplomacy and the pride that had fueled decades of extreme commitment. "I've trained with military units worldwide. I've mastered multiple disciplines. My preparation is comprehensive." The implied comparison hung in the air. Chuck's expression hadn't changed, but something shifted in the atmosphere, like the stillness before a storm. "What if we found out?" Riley suggested, his voice quickening with excitement. "Not a fight, obviously, but some kind of physical challenge or demonstration right here tonight." The audience erupted in cheers. Camera 2 panned across their animated faces, some looking shocked, others eagerly nudging their neighbors. In the control booth, Marissa pressed her headset microphone. Riley, that's not on the schedule. Wrap this segment now. Her tone left no room for negotiation, but the energy had already shifted beyond her control. The audience continued chanting, "Do it! Do it! Do it!" Tom glanced at Chuck, then at the audience, then back to Riley. His competitive spirit weared visibly with professional courtesy. I mean, if Chuck is game for some kind of friendly demonstration. All eyes turned to Chuck, who had remained unmoved. Throughout the escalation, the studio fell into expectant silence. "I think," Chuck said finally, his voice quiet enough that people leaned forward to hear. "That would miss the point entirely." The simple statement landed with unexpected weight. AJ zoomed in slightly, capturing the calm in Chuck's eyes. Not dismissal, not fear, but something else entirely. Wisdom, perhaps. Before Riley could respond, Chuck continued, "True ability isn't about proving anything. It's about knowing when something needs to be proven and when it doesn't." The studio remained silent, absorbing the unexpected response. Even Tom seemed momentarily at a loss for words. But Riley, sensing his viral moment slipping away, wasn't ready to let go. After the break, we'll see if these two legends can be persuaded to give us a little demonstration of their skills. Don't go anywhere. As the commercial light flashed again, the staged friendliness dissolved. Tom turned to Chuck, his famous intensity now fully engaged. "I hope you didn't take that the wrong way. I have nothing but respect." "I know," Chuck replied simply. Those two words delivered without emphasis, yet somehow carrying absolute certainty, caused Tom to pause mid-sentence. For perhaps the first time that evening, a flicker of genuine curiosity rather than performance crossed his face. The commercial break had begun, but AJ kept his camera rolling, capturing what happened when the audience wasn't watching. It was in these unguarded moments that the real story was unfolding, not in what would be demonstrated after the break, but in what was already being revealed in the silence between performances. The live light blinked red again as the show returned from commercial. Viewers at home might have sensed something had shifted during the break. The studio energy had transformed from rowdy anticipation to a more focused tension. "Welcome back to the Riley Sparks Show," Riley announced. His earlier mischief now tempered with a hint of caution. "Marissa's off," camera warning had clearly registered. "We're here with two absolute legends of action cinema, Tom Cruise and Chuck Norris." The camera panned to show both men now seated closer together on a redesigned set area. The traditional talk show chairs had been pushed aside to create a small, open space. Not quite a demonstration area, but enough to suggest something beyond conversation might occur. Before the break, we were discussing the different approaches to action and stunt work across generations. Riley continued, carefully reframing the conversation. "Tom, you were sharing your philosophy on authenticity in cinema." Tom nodded, his famous smile reactivated, though slightly less effervescent than before. "It's about respecting the audience. When people see threshold breach, I want them to know that's really me piloting that helicopter, that I put in the thousands of hours of training to make those sequences possible." "And Chuck," Riley turned, "you pioneered bringing real martial arts expertise to film. How much of what we saw in your films was authentic technique versus movie magic?" "There's always adaptation for the camera," Chuck replied, his voice still measured and unhurried. "But the foundation was real. Had to be. You can't fake fundamentals." "That's exactly it." Tom agreed enthusiastically, leaning forward. "The foundation has to be authentic. That's why I insist on doing things that could easily be created with CGI or doubles." The audience senses the difference. Chuck nodded once, neither disagreeing nor fully endorsing Tom's perspective. Riley sensed the opening and stepped forward. "Since we have you both here, I wonder if you might share a little insight into how screen fighting differs from real technique, maybe even a small demonstration." The audience immediately perked up, the energy surging back into the studio. Camera 2 caught several people on the edge of their seats, phones already positioned to capture. Whatever might happen, Tom glanced at Chuck, then stood with characteristic decisiveness. "I'd be happy to show a few basics. Movie fighting is all about camera angles, selling the impact without making contact. He moved to the center of the open area, immediately, commanding attention with his presence. This is how a standard movie punch works, Tom explained, demonstrating a wide haymaker that deliberately missed an imaginary opponent. Camera angle makes it look connected. Sound effects add the impact, but it's all about creating the illusion without contact. The audience watched rapt as Tom demonstrated several moves. A spinning kick that looked impressive but deliberately missed its mark. A choreographed sequence of blocks and strikes that showcased his physical conditioning while highlighting the theatrical nature of film combat. On set, everything is meticulously planned. Tom continued, now fully in his element. Every move, every reaction, every fall, all designed to be for look dangerous while maintaining safety. The art is making the audience feel the danger without actually creating it. Throughout Tom's energetic demonstration, Chuck remained seated, watching with the measured assessment of someone who had spent decades evaluating technique. His stillness formed a stark counterpoint to Tom's dynamic movement. "Chuck," Riley said, turning to the seated legend, "would you mind sharing your perspective? Maybe show us the difference between movie technique and real-world application." A murmur of anticipation rippled through the audience. AJ kept his camera steady, capturing the subtle shift in Chuck's expression. Not reluctance, but something more considered. Chuck stood slowly where Tom had bounded to his feet with youthful energy. Chuck rose with deliberate economy, no wasted motion, no flourish. He moved to stand near Tom, nodding once in acknowledgement. Movie fighting is designed to be seen. Chuck began, his voice carrying easily despite its softness. Real technique is designed not to be necessary. The cryptic statement caused a few confused glances among the audience. Riley tilted his head. "Could you elaborate on that?" "Real martial arts is primarily about discipline and prevention," Chuck explained. "But when action is required," he turned slightly toward Tom. "May I?" Tom nodded, his expression a mixture of professional courtesy and competitive readiness. "Of course, a movie punch looks impressive." Chuck demonstrated, mimicking the wide camera-ready swing Tom had shown moments earlier, but a real strike. He shifted his stance subtly. The movement, so minimal many audience members leaned forward to see better. Without theatrical wind-up or exaggerated motion, Chuck extended his arm in a simple, direct movement that stopped precisely an inch from Tom's chest. The speed was surprising given the lack of visible preparation. The control evident in the perfect stopping point. "Efficiency over display," Chuck said. "Simply no wasted energy." Tom blinked, genuinely impressed despite himself. "That's remarkably fast." "It's not about speed," Chuck corrected gently. "It's about removing unnecessary motion." Something in Tom's expression shifted competitive professional curiosity, overtaking the performance aspect. "In my training for the Reach series, we incorporated elements of multiple disciplines for authenticity. The choreography was based on actual combat techniques." He stepped back, resetting his stance. Like this sequence, Tom launched into a complex series of moves that showcased his undeniable athleticism and extensive training. The kicks were high, the spins dynamic. Each pose held just long enough to be camera perfect. The audience responded with appreciative murmurs. When Tom finished, slightly breathless, but smiling, he looked to Chuck. The unspoken challenge was clear. "Your turn." Chuck nodded once, acknowledging the display. "Impressive commitment," he said, and the sincerity was evident. Then he added, but in reality, he moved beside Tom and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. The touch was gentle, instructional rather than domineering. But something in the precision of the placement caused Tom to instinctively shift his weight. "Real combat isn't about showing skill," Chuck explained. "It's about ending conflict quickly with minimum risk." With a movement so subtle, many in the audience might have missed it. Chuck demonstrated a simple weight transfer that would have unbalanced an opponent had he applied actual pressure. There was nothing flashy about it. No kicks, no spins, just fundamentals executed with perfect precision. "The best technique is the one you hope never to use," Chuck concluded, stepping back. In the control booth, Marissa watched the interaction with fascination. What had threatened to become an ego-driven spectacle was transforming before her eyes into something more nuanced, a masterclass in different philosophies. Tom stood motionless for a moment, processing what had just happened. His expertise was undeniable, his training extensive, but Chuck's simple demonstration had illustrated something that couldn't be captured in spectacular stunts or death-dying sequences. The difference wasn't in skill, but in purpose. That's enlightening, Tom acknowledged, his competitive edge softening into genuine respect. Your control is remarkable. Chuck inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. Riley, sensing the shift in energy, stepped forward. It seems like we're seeing two different approaches here. One developed for capturing attention, creating spectacle, and another focused on, what would you call it, Chuck? Efficiency, necessity, Chuck corrected mildly. Hollywood teaches us to make simple things look difficult. Martial arts teaches us to make difficult things look simple. The statement hung in the air. Tom's expression flickered with something that might have been recognition, a moment of seeing himself and his career through a different lens. His carefully constructed persona had momentarily given way to authentic consideration. AJ captured it all. The subtle shift in Tom's posture, the thoughtful reassessment visible in his eyes, the quiet confidence in Chuck's stance. These weren't the dramatic moments that would make viral clips, but they were the human truth beneath the spectacle. Before we continue, Riley interjected. I'm curious, Tom. You've built your career on constantly raising the stakes, doing the impossible. What drives that? Why put yourself at risk when alternatives exist? The question cut closer to the core than the playful provocations earlier. Tom paused, seemingly caught between his media-trained responses and something more authentic. I believe in giving everything, he answered finally. The audience deserves to see real commitment, real risk. That's been my philosophy from the beginning. Push boundaries, go beyond what's expected. And you, Chuck? Riley asked. Your career spans decades, yet you've taken a different approach. I learned early that proving yourself to others is a path without end, Chuck replied. At some point, you have to decide who you're really performing for. The simple statement landed with unexpected weight. Throughout the studio, a different kind of silence fell. Not the hush of anticipation, but the quiet of reflection. Tom's expression shifted again, something genuine breaking through the practiced charisma. For perhaps the first time that evening, he spoke without performing. That's worth considering, he said quietly. In the control booth, Marissa checked the time and signaled Riley. What had begun as an attempt to manufacture conflict had evolved into something far more valuable. A rare moment of authentic exchange between two icons with fundamentally different philosophies. We need to take another break, Riley announced. But when we come back, we'll continue this fascinating conversation with Tom Cruise and Chuck Norris, exploring what it really means to put yourself on the line for your craft. Stay with us. As the commercial light flashed again, Tom turned fully toward Chuck. The camera's momentarily forgotten. I'd be interested to hear more about your perspective on this, he said, his famous intensity now channeled into genuine curiosity rather than performance. Chuck nodded, a hint of warmth entering his expression for the first time. Happy to share. AJ kept his camera rolling just long enough to capture the two men moving toward the side of the stage. Already deep in conversation, a striking image of two different generations, two different philosophies, finding unexpected common ground in the space between performances. When the show returned from commercial, the energy in the studio had transformed once again. Where before there had been anticipation of conflict, now there was something more focused, a collective, leaning forward to witness what was unfolding between two legends. Welcome back to the Riley Sparks Show, Riley began, his tone more measured than before. We're having a fascinating conversation with Tom Cruise and Chuck Norris about different approaches to action, stunt work, and authenticity. The camera panned to show the stage now arranged with a simple demonstration area. Several blue practice mats had been laid down during the break, creating a small but defined space. Tom and Chuck stood at the center, both men having removed their jackets. Tom's crisp white shirt sleeves were rolled up precisely to the elbow. Chuck wore a simple black t-shirt that revealed arms still remarkably defined for a man of his years. In the control booth, Marissa paced behind her monitors, eyes flicking between camera feeds and social media metrics. Number Cruz vs Norris is exploding. The social media coordinator announced engagements up 400% since the demonstration was teased. Keep camera 3 wide for safety, Marissa instructed, tapping her headset. AJ, I want clean coverage, but be ready to pull back if things escalate. AJ adjusted his lens, framing both men in a composition that captured their contrasting energies. Where Tom radiated kinetic readiness, weight shifting slightly, hands animated even at rest. Chuck stood perfectly still, his presence paradoxically more noticeable for its quietness. During the break, Riley explained to the audience. Tom and Chuck agreed to give us a deeper look at the difference between cinematic technique and practical application. Tom, I believe you were going to start. Tom nodded, stepping forward with characteristic enthusiasm. What I'd like to demonstrate is how we create the illusion of danger in films while maintaining absolute control and safety. He positioned himself across from Chuck. In Threshold Breach, there's a sequence where my character confronts a former mentor in hand-to-hand combat. The choreography took weeks to perfect because it needed to look spontaneous while actually being precisely mapped out. Tom moved with fluid confidence, showing how a dramatic spinning kick would be executed for cameras. The extension perfect, the timing camera ready, the positioning calculated for maximum visual impact while stopping well short of his training partner. Every movement is designed to read on screen, Tom explained, demonstrating another sequence, a rapid combination of strikes that looked lethal but were carefully controlled. The audience's perspective is always considered what angle sells the impact, what reaction makes the hit seem devastating. Throughout Tom's demonstration, Chuck remained centered and still, his only movements those necessary to play his role in the exhibition. Where Tom projected energy outward, Chuck contained the contrast immediately apparent to everyone watching. For dramatic tension, Tom continued, now fully in his element. Directors often want extreme techniques, jumping kicks, spins, flips, things that wouldn't be practical in reality, but create visual excitement. He demonstrated a particularly athletic sequence that culminated in a flying kick, landing precisely and recovering with the balance of someone who had indeed trained intensively. The audience responded with appreciative applause. The key to movie stunts is maintaining the illusion of danger while ensuring actual safety, Tom added. Barely winded despite the demanding movements. For example, in the helicopter sequence in Threshold Breach, we had to create the sense that one wrong move meant certain death while actually having multiple fail-safes in place. He turned to the audience, his famous intensity engaged. But that doesn't mean the risk isn't real. When I'm hanging from the side of a plane at 5,000 feet, the danger is authentic. The audience feels that authenticity. It's what separates cinema from video games. The statement carried absolute conviction. Tom believed every word he said, and that belief radiated throughout the studio. Several audience members nodded unconsciously, caught in the magnetic field of his certainty. That's why I insist on doing these stunts personally, he continued, turning back to Chuck. The audience deserves to see real commitment, real risk, not computer-generated approximations or stunt performers, however talented. Tom executed one more combination, a blur of movement that showcased his undeniable athleticism and extensive training. The kicks were high, the spins dynamic, each pose held just long enough to be camera perfect. The audience responded with appreciative murmurs. When Tom finished, slightly breathless, but smiling, he looked to Chuck. The unspoken challenge was clear. Your turn. Chuck nodded once, acknowledging the display. Impressive commitment, he said, and the sincerity was evident. Then he added, but in reality, he moved beside Tom and placed a hand lightly on his nuff shoulder. The touch was gentle, instructional rather than domineering, but something in the precision of the placement caused Tom to instinctively shift his weight. Real combat isn't about showing skill, Chuck explained. It's about ending conflict quickly with minimum risk. With a movement so subtle many in the audience might have missed it, Chuck demonstrated a simple weight transfer that would have unbalanced an opponent had he applied actual pressure. There was nothing flashy about it. No kicks, no spins, just fundamentals executed with perfect precision. The best technique is the one you hope never to use, Chuck concluded, stepping back. A murmur rippled through the audience. Confusion mingled with curiosity. After Tom's spectacular display, this understated demonstration seemed almost anticlimactic. Several people exchanged glances, clearly wondering if this was merely a prelude to something more dramatic. Riley sensed the shift in energy. "That's an interesting contrast," he observed. "Tom, your approach is very dynamic, visually impressive. Chuck, yours seems almost minimal by comparison." "Form follows function," Chuck replied simply. "In movies, the function is visual impact. In reality, it's efficient resolution." Tom, competitive instinct engaged, but professional courtesy intact, offered a thoughtful nod. "I understand the principle, but I'd argue that even in practical application, mastery requires athleticism, speed, commitment, qualities we emphasize in film." To demonstrate his point, Tom reset his stance. "In my training for the Reach series, we incorporated elements from multiple disciplines for authenticity. The choreography was based on actual combat techniques used by Special Forces units." He launched into another sequence, less theatrical than before, but still impressive in its execution. Each movement was sharp, controlled, and performed with the intensity that had become his trademark. The audience watched, rapt, as Tom demonstrated techniques that indeed showed serious training beyond mere theatrical display. When he finished, he turned to Chuck with genuine professional curiosity. "What would be your approach to handling a similar scenario?" Chuck considered for a moment, then stepped forward. "May I?" he asked, gesturing for Tom to attack. Tom nodded, instinctively adopting a ready stance, balanced, capable, clearly informed by serious training. "Attack however you'd like," Chuck invited, his posture deceptively relaxed. A ripple of excitement moved through the audience. In the control booth, Marissa tensed, her finger hovering over the button that would cut to commercial if things escalated inappropriately. "Camera 3, stay wide," she instructed. "AJ, be ready to pull back if necessary." Tom hesitated only briefly before launching a controlled sequence, impressive but measured, clearly designed to demonstrate technique rather than overwhelm. The movements were fluid, athletically demanding, and precisely executed. Chuck didn't evade dramatically or counter with his own elaborate techniques. Instead, he made minimal adjustments, subtle shifts in weight, small redirections, tiny angles of deflection that caused Tom's attacks to miss by millimeters rather than inches. The effect was startling. Tom's highly trained movements, so effective at creating cinematic excitement, seemed suddenly excessive compared to Chuck's economic response. Where Tom utilized space, Chuck controlled it. Where Tom demonstrated, Chuck simply was. After several exchanges, Tom paused, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his face. "That's remarkable control," he acknowledged, slightly breathless compared to Chuck's steady composure. The audience had fallen into a different kind of silence. Not the anticipatory hush before spectacle, but the quieter attention of unexpected learning. Phones that had been raised to capture viral moments lowered slightly as people registered. They were witnessing something more subtle than anticipated. "Try again if you'd like," Chuck offered. "This time, don't telegraph your intention." Tom nodded, recalibrating his approach. He reset his stance, focusing with the legendary intensity that had carried him through decades of challenging performances. His next attack was sharper, less performative, a genuine attempt to penetrate Chuck's defenses without the cinematic flourishes. Once again, Chuck's response seemed almost minimal, small adjustments that nonetheless rendered Tom's technically sound attacks ineffective. It wasn't that Chuck was faster, though his speed was remarkable for a man of his years. It was that he seemed to read intention before movement, responding to what would happen rather than what was happening. After another exchange, Tom stepped back, reassessing. His expression had shifted from competitive engagement to genuine curiosity. "You're anticipating before I move," he observed. "How intent manifests before action," Chuck explained. "Most people telegraph what they plan to do through tension, through focus, through subtle weight shifts. Reading that intention creates the appearance of extraordinary speed." To demonstrate, he invited Tom to throw a single strike, any strike, at any time, without warning. Tom complied, launching a rapid jab with professional precision. Chuck wasn't where the punch landed, having shifted by what appeared to be less than an inch. The movement was so subtle many viewers might have missed it entirely. Again, Chuck invited. Tom tried once more, this time with a different angle, different timing. The result was the same. Chuck's minimal adjustment, rendering the attack ineffective, not through blocking or countering, but through simply not being where the strike landed. This is the difference between performing technique and embodying principle, Chuck explained, addressing both Tom and the audience. One demonstrates skill, the other applies it. For the first time that evening, Tom appeared genuinely humbled, not diminished, but recalibrating his understanding in real time. The famous intensity remained, but redirected from performance to comprehension. In films, we want audiences to see the effort, the struggle, the danger. Chuck continued, reality requires the opposite conservation of energy. Minimum telegraphing, maximum efficiency. To further illustrate, he invited Tom to throw a combination anything he chose. Tom complied, delivering a technically impeccable series of strikes that would have looked spectacular on camera. Chuck's response remained minimal, yet somehow nullified everything Tom attempted. The contrast was now unmistakable, not just in technical approach, but in underlying philosophy. Tom's excellence was undeniable, his training evident in every movement. But Chuck's mastery operated on a different plane, less about demonstrating ability than about applying principle. In the control booth, Marissa watched the exchanges with growing fascination. This wasn't the dramatic confrontation she had feared, nor was it the showy exhibition she had expected. Instead, it was becoming an unexpectedly profound illustration of different philosophies, not just of fighting, but of approaching life and career. AJ kept his camera steady, capturing the subtle shifts in Tom's expression from confident performer to genuinely engaged student. The famous intensity was still there, but redirected from performance to understanding. For perhaps the first time all evening, Tom appeared to be fully present rather than presenting. After several more exchanges, Chuck stopped and turned to the audience. What looks impressive isn't always effective. What's effective doesn't always look impressive. He gestured toward Tom with genuine respect. What Tom does requires extraordinary commitment, discipline, and courage. The risks he takes to create authentic experiences for audiences demonstrate remarkable dedication to his craft. The acknowledgement was sincere, free from condescension, Chuck continued. But there's a difference between performing strength and embodying it. One is about how others perceive you. The other is about how you move through the world, regardless of perception. Tom stood motionless, absorbing the insight. For a long moment, the carefully constructed charisma gave way to something more vulnerable. A glimpse of the person beneath the persona, wrestling with a perspective that challenged decades of his approach to career and identity. I've spent my life trying to push boundaries, Tom acknowledged, his voice quieter than before. Always asking, what's the next impossible thing, the next boundary to break? Your approach is different, not better, Chuck clarified. Just different. Your path has inspired millions. There's profound value in that. Throughout the studio, the audience remained silent. Not the silence of disappointment, but of unexpected depth. They had come anticipating spectacle and found instead a masterclass in contrasting philosophies. Riley, sensing the moment, stepped forward. It seems like we're seeing two different interpretations of commitment. One expressed through spectacular achievement, another through lifelong mastery of fundamentals. I'd agree with that, Tom nodded, his expression thoughtful. I've always believed that giving everything, taking real risks, pushing past what seems possible is the ultimate expression of respect for the audience. And I've found, Chuck added, that true mastery isn't about what you can do when everyone's watching, but who you are when no one is. The statement created another moment of silence, not awkward, but contemplative. Throughout the studio, audience members who had come expecting spectacle found themselves witness to something far more nuanced. In that space, something shifted visibly in Tom's demeanor. The performer's mask, worn so comfortably for decades, softened into genuine curiosity. I'd like to understand more about your perspective, he said to Chuck with the focused intensity he usually reserved for describing extreme stunts. The foundation beneath the technique. Chuck nodded, a hint of warmth entering his expression, happy to share what I've learned. They returned to the seating area, continuing their conversation in lowered voices as Riley prepared to send the show to another break. AJ's camera captured the moment in perfect frame. Two men from different generations and philosophies, finding unexpected connection, not in conflict, but in mutual recognition of different paths to excellence. In the control booth, Marissa watched the monitors with a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal wonder. What had begun as an attempt to manufacture viral conflict had evolved into something far more valuable, a rare moment of authentic exchange between two icons who had spent decades in the public eye, yet somehow remained partially unknown until this unguarded interaction. "We need to take another break," Riley announced finally. "But when we return, we'll continue this remarkable conversation between Tom Cruise and Chuck Norris, exploring what it truly means to commit to mastery, authenticity, and purpose. Stay with us." As the commercial light flashed, the studio buzzed with subdued conversation. The audience members weren't reaching for phones to post clips or exchanging excited speculation about what dramatic moment might come next. Instead, they were discussing what they had witnessed. Not just a demonstration of physical technique, but a rare glimpse of contrasting life philosophies embodied in the approaches of two legendary figures. What had been staged as spectacle had transformed into something far more profound, a visual essay on the difference between performing strength and living it, between mastery for display and mastery for purpose. As the stage crew reset for the final segment, that unexpected gift lingered in the studio air. The quiet revelation that sometimes the most powerful demonstrations aren't those designed to impress, but those that invite us to reconsider our fundamental assumptions about what strength, authenticity, and mastery truly mean. The moment the commercial light flashed on, the studio atmosphere shifted dramatically. Floor managers rushed forward. Production assistants appeared with water bottles and towels, and the carefully maintained bubble of on-camera reality gave way to the controlled chaos of live television. Marissa stepped out of the control booth, making a direct line for the stage. Her expression was complex relief mixed with something that might have been professional admiration. "5 minutes, everyone," she announced, her voice carrying professional authority. "Tom, Chuck, that was unexpected in a good way." Her eyes met Riley's with a mixture of exasperation and respect. "And you, we're going to have a conversation later about approved segment changes." Riley had the grace to look slightly abashed, though the glint in his eyes suggested he regretted nothing. "Sometimes you have to follow the moment, Marissa." That was television gold. It was something, she agreed. Unable to deny the power of what had just unfolded, she turned to both action legends. "We've adjusted the final segment to give you both space to continue the conversation if you're comfortable with that." Tom nodded, but his usual media-ready focus seemed slightly fractured. He reached for a water bottle, taking a long drink before turning to Chuck. "That was illuminating," he said, his voice quieter than his on-camera persona meant for Chuck rather than the surrounding crew. "Your control is. I've never seen anything quite like it." Chuck acknowledged the comment with a slight nod. "Decades of practice." "I'd like to hear more about your philosophy," Tom continued. Genuine curiosity evident in his expression. "The part about performing for others versus perhaps after the show." Chuck suggested some conversations are better without cameras. As the crew bustled around them, resetting the stage for the final segment, AJ kept his camera rolling from a discreet distance. Though the sound wouldn't be captured, the visual storytelling was powerful. Tom Cruise, known for commanding every room, standing in quiet, attentive stillness as Chuck spoke briefly, directly without performance. In a corner near the stage, two production assistants whispered while arranging water glasses for the final segment. "I've never seen Tom like this," the younger one murmured. "Usually, he's on full charisma mode, even during breaks." "Chuck has that effect," the senior PA replied. "My cousin worked security at a martial arts expo where Chuck was teaching. Said he was exactly the same with the janitor as he was with the tournament champions." A few feet away, Riley conferred with the head writer, both men speaking in hushed, rapid tones. We need to maintain this energy, Riley insisted, gesturing toward Tom and Chuck. This isn't about viral clips anymore. There's something more valuable happening. The writer nodded, quickly marking up the segment cards. I've never seen Tom this. I don't know. Present. Usually there's a barrier. Charismatic, but impenetrable. Exactly. Riley agreed. His earlier mischief replaced by genuine engagement. Let's strip away the prepared questions and just facilitate the exchange. Something authentic is happening, and I don't want to derail it with manufactured moments. Across the stage, Marissa engaged in intense conversation with the network executive who had come down from the executive booth. A rare occurrence that signaled the unusual nature of what was unfolding. The online metrics are extraordinary, the executive noted, eyes on his tablet. But not in the way we expected. Instead of conflict clips, we're seeing thoughtful engagement, viewers actually discussing the contrast in philosophies. Number strength vs performance is trending alongside the expected number. Chuck Norris tags. We stumbled into something meaningful. Marissa acknowledged, both relieved and surprised. Though if you tell Riley I said that, I'll deny it. His improv decision almost gave me a heart attack. Some of the best television moments are unplanned, the executive observed. This may become one of those cultural touch points people reference years later. Marissa glanced toward the center of the studio where Tom and Chuck continued their quiet conversation, struck by the visible contrast in their energy. Tom's charisma had always been kinetic, a force that radiated outward, filling rooms, commanding attention. Chuck's presence worked differently, centered, contained, yet somehow more grounded for its stillness. Near the edge of the stage, AJ adjusted his camera settings while speaking softly with another camera operator. Did you catch that moment when Tom tried to maintain his performance stance while processing what Chuck was showing him? AJ asked, that internal struggle between the persona and the person. Got it from the side angle, his colleague confirmed. His expression when Chuck slipped past that last combination. Priceless. Like someone who thought he knew the rules of physics, just watched them change. It's not just physical technique, AJ observed. It's two completely different relationships with audience, with self, one performing strength, one just being it. 2 minutes, people, the floor manager called. The announcement sent the studio into final preparation mode. Makeup artists darted in for quick touch-ups. Sound technicians checked microphone levels. Camera operators adjusted their positions. At the center of this controlled chaos, Tom and Chuck continued their conversation, seemingly unaffected by the activity swirling around them. What had begun as professional courtesy had visibly transformed into genuine exchange. Tom leaning in slightly, his famous intensity now channeled into active listening rather than performative display. In a quieter corner of the backstage area, Marissa found herself in conversation with the show's director. Did you see that moment when Tom's whole demeanor shifted? She asked, keeping her voice low. I've been producing celebrity segments for 15 years. I've never seen him drop the persona like that, not even for a second. Chuck has that effect on people. The director replied, my cousin worked craft services on one of his sets years ago. Said he treated everyone exactly the same. Stars, directors, the guy refilling coffee. No performance, just presents. It makes you wonder. Marissa amused. How many layers of performance we all carry without realizing it. Professional masks that eventually become so familiar we forget we're wearing them, especially in this industry, the director agreed. We're in the business of crafting personas, selling narratives. Sometimes I think we forget what exists beneath all that. Their philosophical moment was interrupted by a network page hurrying toward them. Expression urgent. Mississippi Lane, we're getting calls from other networks wanting to extend the segment. CBS is offering to delay their late-night start if we'll run over. Apparently, this is getting cross-platform attention. Marissa raised her eyebrows. Network cooperation was rarer than solar eclipses in the competitive late-night landscape. Tell them we're sticking to schedule, but we appreciate the interest. This isn't about ratings anymore. The page nodded and hurried away, leaving Marissa to observe the continuing interaction between the two legends. Something about their contrasting energies fascinated her, not just as a producer seeking content, but as a human, witnessing something unexpectedly authentic in an environment built around performance. Near the refreshment table, several audience members who had been allowed backstage during the break whispered excitedly. "I thought they were going to do some crazy stunts or something," one young man said. "But this was way more interesting. Did you see how Chuck barely moved, but Tom couldn't land anything?" "It wasn't about who's better," his companion corrected. "It was about two completely different approaches. Like, one is performing for others. One is just being. I came for the spectacle," an older woman admitted. "But I'm staying for the philosophy. Never expected that from a late-night show." At the edge of the stage, Riley glanced over his notes one final time, then deliberately tucked them into his pocket. For the first time in his hosting career, he would go into the final segment without prepared questions or talking points. The moment called for something more authentic than manufactured banter. "1 minute," called the floor manager. The announcement triggered the final preparations. Tom and Chuck made their way back toward their seats. Their private conversation concluded, but clearly not forgotten. Something had subtly shifted in Tom's demeanor. The high-wattage performance energy slightly dimmed, replaced by a more focused presence. As he passed Riley, Tom paused briefly. "Good call," he said quietly. "This turned into something I didn't expect." Riley nodded, momentarily, unable to summon his usual glibness. "Sometimes the best moments aren't the ones we plan." 30 seconds. In the control booth, Marissa settled back into her chair, slipping her headset into place. On her monitors, she could see the social media feeds exploding with reactions, the viewership numbers climbing as words spread about what was unfolding on the Riley Sparks show. But the metrics, for once, weren't her primary focus. What captivated her was the human story playing out under the bright lights. How an attempted viral conflict had transformed into something far more valuable. An authentic moment of connection between two very different approaches to life and craft. Camera 1 tied on Riley for intro, she instructed, then widened to include both guests. "AJ, be ready to capture reaction shots, especially Tom's expressions when Chuck speaks." 10 seconds. Throughout the studio, an unusual atmosphere had settled. Not the manufactured excitement of typical television, but something quieter and more attentive. The audience leaned forward in their seats, phones mostly lowered, engaged in the moment rather than documenting it. 5 seconds. Riley straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and centered himself. The young host, known for orchestrating viral moments, seemed momentarily humbled by the unexpected depth that had emerged from his mischievous provocation. 3, 2, the on-air light blinked red, and the final segment began not with manufactured drama, but with the quiet power of genuine exchange. In that moment, everyone in the studio sensed they were witnessing something rare in the performative world of entertainment. A glimpse of truth beneath the carefully constructed personas that normally separated stars from their audiences. What had begun as a calculated attempt to generate viral conflict had evolved into something far more valuable. A rare moment when the masks of celebrity slipped just enough to reveal the human beings beneath the carefully crafted public images. As the cameras rolled again, capturing the continuation of this unexpected dialogue, the contrast between performed strength and lived authenticity remained at the center, not as theoretical concept, but as visibly embodied reality. The lesson unfolded not through proclamation, but through presence. Chuck's quiet embodiment of principles alongside Tom's genuine curiosity, creating a dialogue that transcended the typical boundaries of entertainment television. In that unexpected space between performance and authenticity, something valuable was emerging, not just for the millions watching, but for everyone involved in creating the moment. Welcome back to the Riley Sparks Show. Riley began as the camera focused on his more subdued expression. If you're just joining us, you've missed something extraordinary. A masterclass in different approaches to action, authenticity, and what it means to put yourself on the line for your craft. The camera panned to show Tom and Chuck seated comfortably. The earlier tension completely dissolved. Tom's posture had changed subtly, the camera-ready alertness replaced by a more genuine attentiveness. Chuck remained as he had been throughout, present, contained, unhurried. "Tom, before the break, you were asking Chuck about the philosophy behind his approach." Riley prompted wisely, stepping back as facilitator rather than provocator. Tom nodded, turning toward Chuck with the focused intensity he usually reserved for describing his most challenging stunts. What struck me was what you said about performing strength versus embodying it. I've built my career on pushing boundaries, taking risks that others wouldn't, partly for the audience, but also because I believe in challenging limits. That commitment is evident in your work, Chuck acknowledged. The discipline required is substantial, but your approach seems fundamentally different, Tom continued. Not just technically, but philosophically. In the audience, a palpable shift had occurred. The energy that had earlier buzzed with anticipation of spectacle or conflict had transformed into something rarer in entertainment venues. Attentive silence, the collective leaning forward that signals genuine engagement with ideas rather than mere distraction. Chuck considered for a moment before responding. In my experience, true strength isn't proven through demonstration. It's cultivated through consistent practice, whether anyone is watching or not. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Early in my career, I was focused on proving myself, winning tournaments, demonstrating technique, seeking recognition. That external validation seemed important. The audience listened in perfect stillness, captivated by the rare glimpse of authentic reflection from someone known more for action than introspection. In the third row, a teenager who had come hoping for spectacular stunts found himself unexpectedly moved by the honesty in Chuck's voice. A quality absent from the carefully crafted interviews and social media snippets that formed most of his exposure to celebrities. What changed? Tom asked, genuinely curious. I realized that performing for others created a dependency, Chuck explained. If your worth is measured by external recognition, you're always at the mercy of an audience. True mastery exists independent of observation. The insight landed with unexpected weight. AJ's camera caught the flicker of recognition in Tom's eyes, a moment of connection to something perhaps long buried beneath decades of spectacular achievement and public adulation. I've always believed that giving everything, taking real risks, is the ultimate expression of respect for my audience, Tom said thoughtfully. But there's something compelling about what you're describing, mastery that exists whether or not anyone witnesses it. In the control booth, Marissa watched the monitors with rare stillness. Her usual rapid-fire instructions to camera operators momentarily suspended. What was unfolding required no directorial manipulation. The authenticity of the exchange carried its own visual power. Both paths require discipline, Chuck acknowledged. Both have value. The question is whether the performance serves the mastery or the mastery serves the performance. Tom's expression shifted again. The famous intensity now channeled into contemplation rather than projection. I hadn't considered that distinction, he admitted. A statement so uncharacteristically vulnerable that several crew members exchanged surprised glances. Riley, sensing the depth of the Manus exchange, asked, how does this philosophy extend beyond martial arts or stunt work? Does it inform how you approach life more broadly? Chuck nodded. In every domain, we choose whether to invest our energy in how things appear or in how things are. The gap between those two creates most of life's complications. The observation resonated throughout the studio. Camera 2 panned across audience members who had lowered their phones, no longer documenting the moment, but simply present for it, a rarity in the age of constant digital mediation. That's profound, Tom acknowledged, his expression unusually reflective. I've spent decades pushing myself to achieve what others consider impossible. But perhaps there's something to be said for mastering fundamentals so completely they become effortless rather than spectacular. He paused, something vulnerable emerging in his famous smile. I wonder sometimes if the spectacular stunts are as much about reassuring myself as impressing the audience, proving I'm still relevant, still capable, still necessary. The admission seemed to surprise even Tom himself. For a brief moment, the carefully maintained persona refined over decades of media training and public appearances gave way to something more human, not diminished, but authentic in a way rarely glimpsed by audiences. Chuck's response carried neither judgment nor easy reassurance. That's a question worth sitting with. The need for external validation is universal. The challenge is recognizing when it begins driving decisions that might otherwise be different. Throughout the studio, a remarkable quiet had descended. Not the awkward silence of discomfort, but the attentive hush of collective recognition. Many in the audience found themselves reflecting on their own performances, the masks they wore in various contexts, the gap between presentation and reality in their own lives. What I find fascinating, Riley observed, is how we're seeing two different interpretations of authenticity. Tom, you've built your career on creating authentic experiences for audiences by taking real risks, doing what others would simulate. Chuck, you've pursued authenticity through lifelong mastery that exists whether cameras are rolling or not. I'd never thought of it quite that way, Tom admitted. But there's truth in that observation. In the front row, an older man who had attended the show reluctantly at his daughter's insistence found himself unexpectedly moved. He had come expecting shallow celebrity banter, but found instead a conversation that echoed questions that had followed him through decades of his own career. Questions about purpose, recognition, and the nature of meaningful achievement. Tom turned to Chuck with newfound respect. I have to ask, after all your years of experience, what matters most? What would you tell someone just starting their journey? Chuck considered the question with characteristic care. Seek to impress yourself. First, external validation is fleeting. Internal standards endure. The simple statement resonated throughout the studio. Even Riley, typically quick with follow-up questions, allowed the moment to breathe, recognizing that some insights require space to be fully absorbed. I'd add one thing. Chuck continued after a moment. The techniques that appear most impressive are often least effective. The most effective techniques rarely appear impressive. That principle extends far beyond martial arts. Tom nodded slowly, absorbing the perspective. That's worth considering in many contexts. As the conversation continued, AJ kept his camera trained on both men, not seeking dramatic moments, but capturing the subtle interplay of two contrasting energies, gradually finding common ground. His years of experience filming celebrities had taught him to recognize authentic connection, and what he witnessed now transcended the usual performative interactions that dominated entertainment television. Has tonight's conversation given either of you a new perspective to take forward? Riley asked as the segment approached its conclusion. Absolutely, Tom replied without hesitation. What Chuck demonstrated was a different relationship to mastery than what drives most of Hollywood, myself included. It's given me something to reflect on. For the first time that evening, a hint of Tom's characteristic enthusiasm returned, but channeled differently, directed inward toward possibility rather than outward toward impact. I'm wondering how this perspective might influence my approach to future projects. Maybe there's value in exploring quieter forms of commitment, not just spectacular displays. Chuck received the comment with a subtle nod, neither encouraging dramatic transformation nor dismissing its possibility. His response embodied the very philosophy he had described: present without performance, attentive without agenda. And you, Chuck, Riley prompted. Has anything in tonight's conversation shifted your thinking? I appreciate Tom's commitment to his craft. Chuck responded simply. The dedication required to develop such diverse skills is significant. Different paths can lead to valuable destinations. In the simplicity of the answer lay its authenticity. Chuck offered neither performative praise nor false equivalence, just honest acknowledgement of different approaches to excellence. As the segment neared its end, Riley asked one final question. Is there a middle ground between these philosophies? A way to bridge spectacular achievement with quiet mastery? The question hung in the air for a moment, both men considering before Tom spoke. Perhaps it's about intention, he suggested, asking not just how will this look, but what purpose does this serve beyond entertainment value or audience reaction? Chuck nodded, and recognizing that the most valuable growth often happens when no one is watching. The preparation, the style, practice, the quiet hours of repetition. That's where mastery is built. Even if performance is where it's displayed, the integration of both approaches, Tom added. Something new emerging in his expression, not the familiar intensity of the performer, but the quieter engagement of the student. Taking risks not just to demonstrate capability, but because the challenge itself has inherent value. Precisely, Chuck agreed. External validation can be a byproduct, but shouldn't be the primary motivation. Throughout the studio, the conversation had created a rare atmosphere reflective rather than reactive, thoughtful rather than merely entertained. Camera 2 panned across audience members, nodding in quiet recognition. The expected spectacle replaced by unexpected depth. Well, there you have it, Riley concluded. Genuine appreciation evident in his voice. A conversation that went places none of us anticipated. I want to thank both of our guests for their openness, their insights, and for giving us all something to think about beyond spectacular stunts or viral moments. The audience erupted into appreciative applause as the show's theme music began to play. Tom and Chuck shook hands, a gesture that carried more authentic connection than the perfunctory greeting at the segment's beginning. As the credits rolled and the live light dimmed, the energy in the studio remained charged with something unusual for entertainment venues. Not the buzz of sensory stimulation, but the quieter resonance of genuine reflection. Marissa stepped out of the control booth, a mixture of relief and satisfaction evident in her expression. Well, that wasn't what we planned, she admitted to the floor manager beside her. But it might be the most genuine segment we've ever aired. Nearby, several audience members lingered, engaged in thoughtful discussion rather than rushing for the exits. I came expecting a showdown, one woman commented to her companion, but got a philosophy lesson instead. Kind of needed that, honestly. Makes you think about how much of life is spent performing versus just being, her friend replied. Especially in the social media age where everything's for display. The studio began to empty, crew members moving efficiently to reset for tomorrow's show. Tom and Chuck made their way toward the exit, still engaged in conversation. Two legends who had found unexpected common ground, not in conflict, but in the recognition of different paths to excellence. Near the studio door, they paused. Tom, accustomed to being surrounded by entourage and handlers, seemed suddenly more approachable. The high-wattage persona dimmed to something more human. I meant what I said out there, he told Chuck, gesturing back toward the stage. Your perspective has given me something to consider. After decades in this business, that's refreshing. Chuck nodded, his expression warming slightly. The journey continues as long as we remain students. With that simple exchange, they parted ways, Tom to his waiting team of assistants and security. Chuck walking unaccompanied toward the exit, his presence no less powerful for its quietness. Behind them, Riley stood at the edge of the stage, watching their departure with thoughtful eyes. A production assistant approached, tablet in hand. Social media is exploding, she reported. Not the conflict clips we expected, but thousands of shares of the mastery versus performance exchange. People are actually having substantive discussions in the comments. Riley smiled. Not the camera-ready grin of his hosting persona, but something more genuine. Sometimes the most viral moments aren't the ones you manufacture. Networks thrilled. The assistant continued. They're already talking special episode formats built around philosophical exchanges between unexpected pairings. Of course, they are, Riley laughed, always trying to package authenticity into reproducible formats. As the studio lights dimmed, AJ packed away his camera, reflecting on what he had witnessed. The footage would undoubtedly go viral. Clips would be shared across platforms and commentators would analyze every moment. But the most powerful element, the authentic connection that had formed between two very different men, could never be fully captured through a lens. It existed in the space between performance and reality. In the quiet recognition that beneath the carefully constructed personas that separated stars from their audiences, there existed a common humanity equally capable of growth, reflection, and the humility to recognize different paths to truth. Across town, hours later, Tom sat alone in his hotel suite, the usual post-appearance adrenaline replaced by something more contemplative. The conversation with Chuck had awakened questions long buried beneath the demanding rhythm of blockbuster production schedules and global promotion tours. What would excellence look like if divorced from external validation? How would his choices differ if spectacle were secondary to substance? Was there a quieter form of authenticity available beyond the increasingly extreme physical challenges that had defined his career? The questions offered no easy answers, but their very existence represented something valuable, a window into possibilities beyond the familiar patterns that had carried him to unprecedented success, yet sometimes left a curious emptiness in their wake. Meanwhile, Chuck drove himself home. The evening's events settling into proper perspective, neither magnified by ego nor dismissed as insignificant. The encounter with Tom had been meaningful, but would not define his tomorrow. This balanced assessment itself embodied the very philosophy he had described: presence without performance, authenticity without announcement. In a world increasingly dominated by spectacle over substance, the evening had offered a rare glimpse of something more valuable: authentic exchange across philosophical divides and the quiet power of choosing mastery over mere demonstration. As the city lights blurred past his car windows, that lesson lingered not in dramatic declarations or spectacular displays, but in the subtle shift of understanding that occurs when performance gives way to genuine presence. What began as an attempt to manufacture conflict had instead revealed a more compelling truth. That real strength, as Chuck had demonstrated, isn't measured by how dramatically it announces itself, but by the quiet confidence with which it simply is. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.